This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, one of the fastest growing men's channels on YouTube. And we're back at you this week with another great story. The title is right on your screen. My wife kept a dark secret with my now deceased brother. Let's get into this story and find out what it's all about. And here's the original post, and he starts off and he says, I'm in the final stages of divorcing my wife of 23 years. I'll call her Connie. We married when I was 23 and she was 21. We met at college during my junior year and quickly became involved. We knew right away we would eventually marry, and we did right after she graduated. I got a job with a company near where I grew up. My parents operated a working farm there with 8 full-time and 45 seasonal workers. I grew up working on the farm, as did my brother. I'll call him Bill. Bill was 3 years my junior. He never went to college and instead worked as a laborer on the farm. Through the years, Dad tried giving Bill several management positions, but he just couldn't handle it. He just wanted to be a farm laborer, do his work and get paid, and so that's what he did his entire life until he passed away from cancer earlier this year. The farm has nearly 700 acres and 3 homes. My parents live in the main house, which sits back off the main road and is also where the farm office is located. My brother lived in the small carriage house out where the driveway meets the main road. My wife, kids, and I live in a farmhouse 3/4 of a mile down the main road from my parents and brother. My parents bought this adjacent property through the business to expand the farm and preserve the farmhouse. All 3 homes belong to the family farm corporation, and my brother and I lived in these homes rent-free, so it's a pretty good deal. My parents are the only officers in the company. However, they set it up so that my brother and I would inherit the farm when they passed, with Bill to receive 45% and me getting 55%. I was awarded controlling interest as I helped them run the farm in addition to my day job. I was not paid for this work. However, we lived rent-free on the property, and of course, I would inherit majority ownership eventually. It was an ideal family environment, and we all loved living there. My oldest child is a girl, 21. Next is a boy, 20, another boy, 17, and our youngest is a girl, 15. Life was great for all of us. I had a very happy and loving marriage with Connie. Our kids were wonderful. My job was going well, and the family farm was booming. I think I gave you enough background where you get the picture. Now let me get to the issue, which is the reason for my posting. About 3 years ago, my brother was diagnosed with cancer. He was never good about taking care of himself and didn't seek treatment until his symptoms became unbearable. By the time the cancer was discovered, it had spread to other areas of his body. He went through a terrible time with chemotherapy and radiation treatments. It really took a toll on him, but he continued working. Eventually, Bill passed away earlier this year, and it was an emotional time for all of us, especially me. Bill looked up to me as his idol, and I helped him through a number of life problems he had over the years. Bill's existence consisted of going to work, then spending the rest of his time at the bars and social clubs in town. He had a drinking problem, which I helped him conquer 4 years before he passed. He also had serious tax problems, which I helped him resolve. He just was the kind of person who struggled with life's basic tasks, and I was always there to rescue him. As a result of this, he and I were very close. My wife and kids loved him too, but they all thought of him as crazy Uncle Bill. He was by no means dumb or lazy. He just had no ambition or desire to improve himself. Over the years, Bill had a number of girlfriends, but nothing lasted. Most of them were women he met at the bars. He did date a nice girl once, and I really thought it was going to go somewhere, but she eventually left him due to his drinking. My parents just accepted Bill for who he was and didn't pressure him. They loved him unconditionally, just like they loved me. So it sounds like Bill is a Chad. In his will, Bill named me the executor of his estate and specified I was to receive 100% of all his assets, which included a life insurance policy, a small checking account, and his personal possessions like his motorcycle and truck. Then, about 2 weeks after his funeral, I was over at his place paying bills and looking through piles of paperwork he had stacked on his kitchen table. It was there I came across a statement from an out-of-town bank. The account balance was in excess of $70,000. I was shocked at the amount, but what shocked me even more were the legal names on the statement. The account was in Bill's name, with my youngest son, who I'll call Joe, listed as the payable on death beneficiary, with the acronym of POD, payable on death. Reading this, I was perplexed. I asked myself, why would my brother set up an account this way? And why would he list only Joe as the beneficiary? He was no closer to Joe than any of my other kids. In fact, if anything, Bill was closer to the rest of my kids than he was to Joe. My mind started racing, but I couldn't come up with anything. I was going to call my wife and parents and tell them, but then decided not to just yet. The next day I drove to the bank. Being the executor, I was able to find out that Bill opened the money market account a month after Joe was born and made regular contributions to it every 2 weeks. At this point, my mind zeroed in that there had to be some connection between Bill and Joe, and then wondered, did Bill and Connie have an affair? Was Joe Bill's son? It started driving me crazy. Well, that's what I would think right away when I saw that. That night I went back to Bill's house and started going through his files, trying to find something that would give me a clue. I spent hours combing through everything in the house. Then I found it. Something that changed my life forever. It was 2 old photos of my wife. In one, she was topless. In the other, she was holding a beer, wearing nothing at all. Both photos were taken in Bill's bedroom. Oh my goodness. My world crumbled. I stayed at Bill's house for several more hours that night, going between crying and being angry. Eventually, Connie called and asked what I was doing, so I went home. I didn't confront her then, as I had to think through what I wanted to do. I actually thought of just ignoring what I found. Are you kidding me? After all, the pics were from years ago, and my brother was no longer alive. I quickly shot that down, as I knew I could never live with myself knowing what I knew. What I decided to do first was to tell my parents what I had found, and that's what I did the following day. I took the afternoon off and met with them at the farm office. I showed them the bank account and then showed them the pictures of my wife. So he showed his parents his wife's pictures. Well, I guess if you wanted to present all the facts, that's what you have to do. My parents couldn't believe it. They were both upset and disgusted by the discovery. They knew exactly what this meant, and it seemed to impact them as much as me. They asked me what I was going to do. I told them I planned to confront Connie, and if it was true, I would divorce her. They understood, but my mom encouraged me to hear her out and think it through before acting. That evening after dinner, I took Connie over to Bill's house with me. She thought she was going there to help me clean and get rid of things. When we walked through the door, I sat her down and said there's something we need to discuss. I then went to retrieve a packet containing the bank statement and photos of her. I first handed her the bank account statement. She looked at it and just said, "Wow." She couldn't believe Bill had saved so much money. I asked if she noticed anything odd about the statement, and she said no, just the amount. I then asked her to read the entire statement out loud, starting at the top. She read the bank's name and address, and then read Bill's name, followed by the payable on death to Joe, our last name, so their son's name. When she read this, she looked up at me with a look on her face signaling shock. I think she knew right then she was busted. She said, "I wonder why Bill did this." I asked her if there was something she wanted to tell me, and she said no, shaking her head from side to side. I said, "Are you sure?" And she said yes. I said, "Okay." I then pulled out the photos and handed them to her. She immediately froze, and the tears started flowing from her eyes. She said, "Let me explain." And I told her, "Please do." She excused herself while she went in the bathroom, and I heard her in there regurgitating. She came out 15 minutes later and came clean about the affair she had with Bill 18 years ago. She said that it was stupid and selfish, claiming it only lasted a couple weeks. Connie said she quickly realized what she had done and ended it. She claimed since that time she had distanced herself from Bill, interacting with him only when other family is around. I then asked her if Joe was Bill's son. She said no, he was definitely mine. I asked her how she was so sure. She said she knew he was, then said even if he wasn't, he was because I raised him. So she's talking out of both sides of her mouth there. I told her not to go there, as this has nothing to do with my relationship with Joe, but has everything to do with her relationship with Bill. She cried harder and begged for my forgiveness, but I showed her no empathy and didn't comfort her in any way. Instead, I just got up to leave. I told her not to come home until she settled down and cleaned herself up, as I didn't want our kids to see her like this. I went home and she came home about an hour later. She kept asking me to talk. I told her there would be time to do so later. We slept in the same bed that night and she tried snuggling with me, but I refused her and turned on my side. Well, I wouldn't even have slept in the bed with her. She cried in silence for most of the night without sleeping. The following day, I took PTO, which stands for paid time off, and went up to the main house to meet with Mom and Dad. I told them about Connie's confession, and they again were in complete disbelief. I next confirmed I would be divorcing Connie. My mom asked if that's what I really wanted, and I said no, I didn't want this, but after finding out what she had done, I would never trust her again and would never touch her again. After meeting with them, I went back home and told Connie I would be filing for divorce. Good for you, OP. That's the right thing to do. She completely broke down and begged me, saying this all happened so long ago and that she knew Joe was my son. She just knew it. I again told her Joe has nothing to do with this. My love for him will not change regardless of who his biological father is. I told her this was about she and I, and that she betrayed me in the worst way. I told her I didn't care if it happened 18 years ago or 1800 years ago. That afternoon, I met with the attorney we used for the farm. He recommended a divorce attorney who was a good friend of his. I got an appointment that afternoon and started the process. Since the farm and the three houses were all part of the corporation, they were not in any jeopardy in the settlement. However, the attorney explained that the rest of our assets would be split 50-50 even with infidelity. See how smart the parents were of setting up that farm as a corporation, and they were the only two officers, and then they had it set up where the kids would inherit it after they passed away, because they probably figured, hey, there was a risk for something like this happening. If one of my kids, got divorced and we had them, as part owner of the farm right now, well, then their divorced spouse would get a share of the farm. This way, like the attorney says here, they're not going to get anything, or this woman in this case isn't going to get anything in terms of the farm. That's all a corporation, which she is not entitled to. He also explained since my wife has never worked outside the house, I would likely be required to pay spousal support for at least 5 years, possibly more. Even with infidelity, he's going to have to pay spousal support. Unbelievable. I mean, the laws are totally against guys. He said we would fight this in court, but based on similar clients he represented in past cases, that was the likely outcome. He says, I was expected and was prepared for this. I think he meant to say I expected and was prepared for this. Money wasn't a top concern of mine. I just wanted out of the marriage. Now, we're at a point in this story where I want to encourage you, if you're liking what you hear, hit that like button. That'll help get this video seen by people all over the planet. Now, let's go on with this story. I went home and told Connie, and she became totally unhinged. She cried and pleaded for a second chance, but I kept telling her no. I then told her I would be talking to the kids that weekend. I said I would first talk to Joe, then meet with the rest of the kids all together with Joe and tell them. She asked if she could be part of the meetings. I told her no. She could meet with them after I did if she wanted. Saturday morning came and I told Joe there was something I needed to talk to him about. We walked over to the creek on the farm where we have a pavilion and picnic benches. It was there I told him the news. He was crushed, as you would expect, and was very worried. He asked me if he was not my son, would I still love him? I told him of course I would. I told him to not even think of that, as regardless if he or any of his siblings were not mine biologically, my relationship with them would not change. I explained that this was something between his mother and I, that he and his siblings were not at fault. I then explained that I would be divorcing her, again reiterating that it was 100% a result of the affair with Uncle Bill and had nothing to do with him. We sat out there for a couple hours just talking. I told him the next step was to meet with his siblings when he was ready. He asked if he could have some time to prepare. I told him sure, and to take all the time he needed, as I wanted him to be comfortable with everything. We went back to the house and acted like everything was normal, but my wife was not herself and my kids immediately recognized it. We spent most of the afternoon lounging poolside, playing cornhole and tossing the frisbee. It was just a normal summer weekend for us, except for the dark secret that was about to be revealed. After dinner, Joe came to me and said he was ready to talk with his brothers and sisters. However, they all had plans that evening with their friends, so we decided to do it the next morning. We all got up the next morning, ate breakfast, and headed to Sunday services as a family like we normally did. After church, we went home and I told the kids I needed to speak with them privately out on the back patio. My daughter asked if Mom would be joining us, and I told her not now, but she would be meeting with you all later. This immediately put the kids on edge. I broke the news to them. It was hard seeing their faces. They reacted how you would expect, with disbelief, followed by anger, then sorrow. I then told them that I would be divorcing their mom and they all started crying. We talked at length after that, and in the end, they understood my decision. My daughter said she hated her mother and wanted nothing to do with her. I told each of them that they are all young adults and they need to process this how they choose. But I told them to hear their mother out and not to judge her by this one thing. I told them to judge her by their entire relationship, which has been very good. They all agreed, but were very angry, and none of them wanted to meet with her right after. I told them I wanted to get DNA tests for each of them. I explained that their mom said she was only with Uncle Bill for a short time, but I wanted the test for my own peace of mind and for the truth. I reassured them that if it did turn out that any of them were not my biological children, it wouldn't matter, as they all were legally mine and I'd love them all the same, even if it turned out one or more of them is not mine biologically. Later that evening, their mom met with them in the dining room. It was very emotional. I was outside when this went on, but could hear some of the conversation. In the end, the kids all told their mother they loved her, but they would never see her the same way, and likely would never forgive what she did to me and our family. For my wife, hearing this was devastating, but she deserved it. From that night, right through our divorce, my wife slept in the guest room. The divorce took nearly 8 months to complete. During this time, my wife pleaded with me daily to stay together and to go to marriage counseling, but I didn't budge. 3 months after D-Day, my parents got an offer from a developer to buy the house my family lived in and the surrounding 80 acres for an ungodly amount of money. My parents and I made a business decision and accepted the offer. My wife, two youngest kids, and I moved out 60 days later. It was at that time my wife moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in town. This is when the reality of everything hit her hard. She became depressed to the point where she had to be put on multiple medications. I moved back into my parents' home temporarily. It was then I decided to build my dream house on the backside of the farm. This was something I wanted to do for a while, and this was the opportunity to make it happen. I designed the house with the architect, a mid-sized log cabin with 3 bedrooms. The house is now complete, and I live there with my two youngest kids. They also spend a couple nights a week with their mom. My ex is still very depressed, but getting better. She wants to get back together, but I have no interest. I treat her with respect, like someone I feel obligated to, but I have no feelings for her at all. It's really strange how discovering the affair turned off my love for her like a light switch. We still talk daily, but I try to limit the conversations to our kids. She doesn't have anyone here except for our family. So I can't just cut her off completely. Again, I feel a sense of obligation to her. Regarding the DNA test, as it turned out, all of my kids are biologically mine. He says, "Phew!" All the drama and sleepless nights were for nothing. But I had to know. Learning this didn't change how I felt about Connie, though. She betrayed me in the worst way, and I will never forget or completely forgive her. I still, for the life of me, don't know why Bill set up that account with Joe as the beneficiary. My ex swears they never discussed paternity, and in this I believe her. I don't know if I believe her because I find it odd that he did that. So she may be saying, hey, I never talked to him, but I think otherwise. I guess Bill just guessed or possibly wished Joe was his. Overall, I feel good about where I am now and the relationship I have with my kids and my ex-wife. Though I'll never trust her again, I do care about her and want her to live a happy life. I don't know why I decided to post this, but writing it out made me feel better and made me even more appreciative of how everything turned out. If you made it this far, thanks for reading my story, and good luck to you all, OP. So that's the end of his original post. Now, he doesn't have an update, But in the comments, he did reply to a few people and answered some questions. So we're going to take a look at that now. And here's his replies to the community. The first response is from a man, and he says, "Man, I applaud you for how you handled this situation so calmly. I wasn't able to do the same, and it really messed me up. Question for you. Are you still having relations with your ex after your divorce? I still do, and it's really messing with my head as she is currently in a committed relationship with another guy." You see what I mean, guys, about women and their exes? Because this guy who responded to the OP is saying he's divorced from his wife and she's in a relationship now with another guy, but he is still having relations with her. That's why you can never trust those kind of situations. Never. So the OP responds and he says, "Staying calm was difficult, but I had to do it for my kids and for my sanity. As far as my wife and I, we have not had any physical intimacy since I found out, and it is highly unlikely I will ever be with her again. The thought of intimacy with her just completely repulses me." Absolutely, it would repulse you after she was screwing around with your brother. Like I said in my post, I now view her now as someone for which I have an obligation, but not as a wife or lover, because she's living there in that town with him and she doesn't have anybody else except for the family. He feels obligated to her. And it's probably in his best interest to treat her with respect like he's doing. But I would definitely not have anything to do with her beyond that. And it sounds like that's what he's trying to work out there. Now, here's another response from a guy. He says, "OP, I've got to ask, how do you feel about your brother now? I know you were close when he was alive, but after finding out what he did, I'd have a deep hate for him. I'd make it a point to visit the cemetery whenever I could and take a big piss on his grave. That's just me." Now, the OP responds and says, "The only thing I feel now towards my brother is pity. I understand even more now that he was just a broken person who struggled his entire life with internal demons. I'd like to think his bad behavior was due to his alcohol use, but I don't know. All I wish for him is that he has made it to the other side and is now at peace with himself." So this guy really is taking the high road, where I think most people out there would be like, "I don't give a crap what happened to that SOB. I hope he burns in hell." But this guy views things differently. He's obviously very mature and he's very confident in himself. And he's, taking the high road on this. Next, here's a response from a woman. She said, "Did your wife ever tell you why she had the affair with your brother? Based on what you told us about her, this behavior seemed totally out of character. Thanks and good luck, OP." And the OP responds, he says, "At first she told me she didn't know." Isn't that what they all say? Then she said it was due to the boredom and isolation of being a stay-at-home mom living out in the country in an area where she had no friends. She said Bill's life seemed so exciting. So exciting. The guy was working a basic job, a labor job, and then going to the bars and getting drunk every night. That seemed exciting to her. And she said that's what drew her to have the affair. She claims she realized soon after her sins and stopped it cold. Who knows for sure? And at this point, it doesn't matter anymore, he says. And finally, the last response here is from a woman. She says, "You seem to rush to divorcing your wife over this indiscretion without regard to the years of happiness that you two enjoyed together. Did you ever contemplate putting in the hard work of trying to make it work?" Isn't it disgusting how some of these people look at the betrayed spouse and say, "Didn't you think about putting in the hard work? You just abandoned everybody, abandoned the family. Why did you just throw in the towel? Why didn't you put in the hard work and try to save your marriage?" Who wants to go through that? In this case, the wife is the one who threw away the marriage when she stepped out with this guy's brother. She says, "Do you ever regret divorcing your wife now that you're living all alone?" And the OP responds, he says, "Thank you for your questions. Yes, like I said in my post, I thought long and hard of just ignoring the evidence and just going on with life like everything was fine, but I knew I couldn't live with myself and would never be able to treat my wife the same again. Do I regret divorcing her? No, not for 1 minute. I feel unbelievably strong now, strength she had temporarily stolen from me." And he goes on, he says, "In fact, I had a discussion with our preacher about this, as I was concerned that I felt no remorse for divorcing my wife. To my surprise, our preacher said he believes betrayed spouses should almost always divorce in order to regain their inner strength and self-worth." Well, this preacher must be based. He's not one of these old school preachers who says, hey, you got to stay together no matter what. He said we should forgive sins, but that forgiveness doesn't mean staying in a bad marriage. I totally agree. And I totally agree with this preacher as well. So those are the responses to the comments that he got. And now I wanted to cover the moral of the story. What I think are kind of the key takeaways here. Number one, if you are in a relationship with a cheater, any third party is a risk. I'm sure if you asked this guy, was there any risk of your wife having an affair? He would have probably said, no, absolutely not. And then if you would have asked him, is there any risk of your wife possibly having an affair with a family member? He would have said, are you crazy? There's no way that would happen. But just look what happened here. Next, it's important for the betrayed partner to communicate the facts and truth of the affair to family and friends. Now, some people may disagree with how he handled this, but I have to say, in all these cases, I totally agree with the betrayed spouse communicating the facts about the affair to everyone, all the vested parties, because that way everybody knows the truth. Everyone knows what's going on, and the cheating spouse isn't able to spin a story. Finally, as we've talked about over and over in these stories, once lost, trust can never be fully rebuilt. If you see some of these stories where people stayed with their spouses, what they say is, we're a work in progress, meaning we're still rebuilding that trust, but it's not totally rebuilt. And guess what? They're going to go through their entire life that way, and it will never get fully rebuilt. Why do you want to put yourself through that purgatory? Just end it and move on. And if you want to find somebody else, go do that. So those are my thoughts on this story. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Would you have stayed with this woman, after she had this affair with your brother? How would you have handled the situation? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. And I will talk to you on the next one.